Jonah cursed under his breath as another panel of the failing space station clanged against the hull with a dramatic groan, scattering sparks like fireworks at a festival he had definitely not signed up for. He had always imagined heroism as something grand. Dramatic rescues, medals, applause, maybe a heroic theme song. Instead, he was crouched in a narrow maintenance corridor, one elbow pressed against the wall for balance, trying not to inhale the acrid scent of overheated circuitry while muttering, "Why do these things never wait until after breakfast?" He gave the console a firm smack, which somehow made the blinking lights blink faster, as if the machine was judging him. Then came the scream, a sound so sharp it made Jonah's teeth rattle in zero gravity. He dropped the wrench he was holding, muttered something about interstellar OSHA violations, and bolted toward the noise. The scene was almost cinematic, if cinema involved more debris and less budget. A bulkhead had collapsed in the docking bay, leaving a tangle of pipes, wires, and floating panels that bobbed in the station's weak artificial gravity like deadly jellyfish. And there she was, a woman trapped beneath the rubble, her long, delicate ears jutting upward through the metal like elegant antennae, twitching with every muffled exclamation. Jonah blinked at her. "Okay," he said aloud to no one in particular. "That's unusual, and probably illegal in at least 3 countries and 1 galactic treaty." The woman's eyes, an iridescent green that seemed to shift with the weak light, met his, and she didn't scream again. Instead, she arched one elegant eyebrow in a way that made him feel simultaneously guilty and amused. Jonah's first attempt to lift the bulkhead ended with him pinned against the wall as the metal groaned, almost mocking him. "Yep," he said, panting. "Still not a hero. Maybe just a mildly inconvenient human." Leora, for that was her name, gave a soft, musical laugh that seemed almost designed to infuriate him, because it made the situation both lighter and more terrifying at the same time. "You do realize," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with amusement, "that if you continue to grunt like that, we might die of embarrassment before the energy storm gets us." Jonah grinned, despite the danger, and quipped, "Well, at least one death is optional, right?" He strained again, and the bulkhead shifted just enough to free her arm. Then, in a series of awkward contortions, they worked together, him pushing, her guiding, both of them cursing and laughing in equal measure, until she was finally upright, brushing sparks from her dark, iridescent hair. Her ears twitched as she shook her head, a tiny smile playing on her lips. Jonah glanced at the viewport. The nearby star flared like a cosmic tantrum, bathing the station in fiery oranges and reds that made the debris look like glitter in a chaotic fashion show. "We should move," Jonah said, trying to sound authoritative while imagining how his life insurance would explain, "Rescued alien woman while station imploded," on the claim form. Leora tilted her head, her long ears flicking as if evaluating him. "You humans are dramatic, but yes, let's avoid spontaneous combustion." As they navigated the broken corridors, Jonah couldn't resist commenting on the absurdity of floating trash bins, loose oxygen canisters, and the unfortunate drifting of what looked like a sentient mop. Each joke he made seemed to ease the tension in the metallic belly of the station, though he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was observing them, not through cameras or sensors, but something far older, far larger, and far less interested in humor than Jonah was. The first chapter of their unintended partnership closed with a small, mutual grin. Both relieved, both alive, both inexplicably aware that the universe had just sent its RSVP, and Jonah, of course, had to comment, "Well, at least our audience is polite for now." Jonah's fingers danced over the shuttle's controls in a chaotic ballet of trial, error, and mild panic, while Leora hovered beside him with a look that was equal parts amusement and incredulity. "Do you always operate a vessel like a caffeinated squirrel on a tilt-shift treadmill?" she asked, her long ears flicking as she leaned against the console. Jonah grinned, teeth clenched, one hand on a blinking lever and the other trying to keep the emergency coffee thermos from floating into the control panel. "Only when there's a cosmic force hunting us," he replied. "Otherwise, I'm all about elegance and style." Leora let out a musical laugh, which somehow made the alarms blaring in the shuttle seem less oppressive, even though sparks occasionally popped from an overtaxed power conduit and Jonah's seat harness refused to cooperate. The shuttle shuddered violently as they slipped out of the station's orbit, and Jonah shouted, "Congratulations, We survived the first 5 minutes of freedom. Someone get me a medal. Leora rolled her eyes but didn't argue, instead pointing to the external sensors. The star they had fled was flaring unpredictably, sending arcs of energy into the void that distorted their instruments and made Jonah mutter, "That's not dangerous, right?" Right? Leora's eyes sparkled with something that was not quite fear and not quite irritation. "You have the unique ability to make peril sound like a punchline," she said. "It's remarkable." Jonah took it as a compliment, even if his stomach didn't. As they sailed through the debris-littered outskirts of the system, the void suddenly rippled, a subtle bending of light that made the stars look like water on a heat wave. Jonah froze mid-joke. He had been attempting a commentary on zero-gravity snack consumption, and whispered, "Okay, that's new, not in the manual." Leora's long ears twitched forward. "It's the threshold," she said simply, her voice carrying an edge of solemnity that clashed hilariously with Jonah's mental image of a cosmic bureaucrat. Jonah's first thought was to ask if the threshold accepted late paperwork, but instead he pressed a few more buttons and prayed the shuttle wouldn't spontaneously explode. The threshold was not polite. It didn't knock, it didn't email, it just existed, folding reality like origami and waiting for someone foolish enough to notice. Jonah had noticed, very thoroughly. Hours passed as they navigated the shuttle with a combination of skill, improvisation, and Jonah's uncanny ability to panic at exactly the wrong moment. He attempted to make small talk. "So, Leora, do you get this kind of audience attention often? Cosmic intelligence, death approaching, the usual?" Leora snorted, the sound bouncing in the cramped cabin. "I assure you, humans are rarely this amusing." Jonah took that as high praise and continued, despite the shuttle's hull rattling in protest. Between evasive maneuvers and dodging fragments from the collapsing station, they discussed trivial matters. Her species, peculiar habit of ear communication, his tendency to collect useless junk, and the time he accidentally caused a small electrical fire in a neighboring colony. Somehow, humor kept them sane, or at least slightly less panicked. By the time they reached a temporary calm beyond the storm's edge, Jonah and Leora had formed an odd rhythm. Jonah would comment on how ridiculously fragile their shuttle seemed, and Leora would respond with dry, pointed observations about human impracticality. And yet, in this laughter and banter, they both sensed the lurking awareness of the threshold, a presence that seemed to stretch infinitely beyond comprehension, curious about the audacity of a man who joked while the universe threatened to erase him. Jonah floated near a viewport, watching stars bend and shimmer in the cosmic tide, and said with a grin, "Well, I always wanted to meet a force that didn't like me. Just didn't think it would be this polite about it." Leora's ears twitched with amusement, but there was also recognition. He was a human who refused to cower, and somehow, that made all the difference. The threshold waited beyond the shuttle's shields, a presence that folded the void around it like a living origami, bending light and time in ways that made Jonah's stomach lurch in delight and terror simultaneously. He pressed a hand against the console, feeling vibrations that were not mechanical, pulses that seemed to resonate with his very bones. Leora stood beside him, her long ears twitching with concentration, her eyes narrowing in that unreadable expression humans might call determination. Jonah swallowed. "So this is it. First impression, you are terrifying but also oddly polite. No RSVP, no knock, but still polite." Leora let out a musical chuckle. "Your commentary is unusual for a first contact scenario, but it might just survive the experience." Jonah grinned, though his hands shook. "Well, if cosmic annihilation has a sense of humor, I'm clearly doing my part." The threshold shifted, expanding and contracting in a slow rhythm that seemed to measure Jonah's very being. It had no voice, no form that could be described in words, but Jonah felt it probe, like a curious cat testing the edge of a paper cup. Leora's eyes glimmered, and she touched a small device at her wrist, one of the few pieces of alien technology the shuttle had salvaged. "It recognizes you," she said quietly. Jonah looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "That's flattering. I think." She shook her head slightly, her long ears flicking. "It doesn't recognize your humor. It recognizes your choices. You chose to stand between it and me. That matters." Jonah's chest tightened. He had not considered heroism as a series of logical outcomes, only as something impulsive, often clumsy, and occasionally ridiculous. And yet, somehow, his impulsiveness had earned the attention of an entity older than the stars themselves. The threshold extended its influence, warping the shuttle's surroundings, and Jonah yelled over the howl of bending space. "Well, if it's trying to make me feel small, it's doing a great job." Leora rolled her eyes but allowed a smirk, reaching out to steady the trembling console. She whispered instructions, a mixture of physics, intuition, and alien trickery, and Jonah followed, fumbling, cursing, and laughing in equal measure. Each maneuver was a dance, a combination of precise calculation and sheer human stubbornness. The threshold pulsed in response, not attacking but observing, measuring. Jonah realized it was learning, or at least intrigued. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, until finally the entity receded, leaving the shuttle trembling but intact. Jonah slumped into the pilot's chair, his body exhausted but his mind alive with a new clarity. "Well," he said weakly, "I guess cosmic forces appreciate a good punchline eventually." Leora laughed, the sound echoing softly in the quiet of the cockpit. Her long ears twitched forward, a subtle signal of approval. "You've changed," she said simply. "You are braver, more deliberate, not reckless exactly. But your impulsive nature has gained weight, it carries responsibility now." Jonah stared at her, realizing she was right. He had acted without thinking initially, but the chain of choices, the jokes, the mistakes, the stubborn courage, had shaped the outcome. They drifted through the calm void, watching distant stars shimmer and warp under residual distortions from the threshold. Jonah considered the vastness of the cosmos, the smallness of human life, and the strange, improbable impact of one individual's actions. "You know," he said, nudging Leora lightly with his shoulder, "we should write a travel guide or at least a warning pamphlet. How to Survive Cosmic Judgment with a Sense of Humor. Could be a bestseller." Leora laughed softly, a sound like a ripple through starlight. "I think the universe has better plans than pamphlets, Jonah, but you survived. That's enough for now." Jonah nodded, watching the light refract across her long ears, and felt a strange, satisfying sense of completion. He had been ordinary, fearful, even bumbling. Now he was someone the threshold knew existed, someone who mattered. And for the first time, he understood that sometimes heroism wasn't about medals or applause. It was about being willing to stand where no one else dared, and to face the impossible with laughter in your mouth and courage in your chest. The shuttle drifted onward, carrying them toward new stars, new dangers, and, improbably, new jokes. Jonah leaned back, exhaling, and realized that the universe might be terrifying, indifferent, and absurd all at once. But he had survived. And with Leora beside him, he had a partner for the chaos, a witness to his mistakes, and a reason to keep moving forward. The stars stretched infinitely before them, and for the first time, Jonah felt ready to meet whatever came next, not as a frightened man, but as someone who had faced death and walked through it, joking all the way. The shuttle hummed quietly, a small island of stability drifting through a universe that no longer seemed quite so indifferent. Jonah sat in the pilot's chair, hands resting lightly on the controls, and for the first time in what felt like eons, he let himself breathe. Leora moved through the cabin with the fluid grace of her kind, her long ears flicking as she inspected the minor repairs Jonah had attempted during the escape from the threshold. "You're getting better at this," she said, tilting her head. "By better, I mean your fumbling has become a useful pattern. The threshold might even appreciate the comedic timing." Jonah laughed, a short, relieved sound, useful fumbling. Who knew my life's talent would finally pay dividends? Outside the viewport, stars stretched into lines of silver and blue as the shuttle cut through the empty corridors of space. The energy waves from the dying star had settled, leaving a calm that almost felt unnatural. Jonah leaned back, imagining the cosmic bureaucracy filing a report on his escapades and giving him a grade somewhere between mildly amusing and dangerous wildcard. Leora floated near, adjusting a panel that had been rattled loose, and sighed. "You have changed," she said quietly. "Not in small ways. You've learned the weight of choice, and that courage isn't always loud. It can be subtle, even awkward, but effective." Jonah nodded, thinking about the chaos they had navigated. The collapsing station, the flaring star, the presence of an entity that existed beyond comprehension. He realized that before all of this, he had been impulsive, reckless, and clumsy, qualities that had nearly killed him multiple times. Now, those same traits, tempered by awareness and humor, had saved them both. They drifted toward a nearby settlement orbiting a quiet planet, a tiny collection of domed habitats that glittered faintly against the void. Jonah initiated communications, trying to make the greeting sound casual instead of panicked, though the trembling of the shuttle made it sound like a jazz improvisation performed entirely by accident. Leora's long ears twitched as she watched him, amusement softened by genuine admiration. "Do you ever stop talking?" she asked. Jonah shrugged, grinning, "Only when I'm unconscious or dead. One of those will happen sooner or later, so I figure I'm safe for now." Leora shook her head, laughing softly, and Jonah felt a warmth he hadn't anticipated. Through the tension, the jokes, and the cosmic terror, they had forged an unspoken bond stronger than any manual or protocol could have predicted. As the shuttle docked, Jonah glanced at the controls, realizing how far he had come. The manual he had ignored, the reckless instincts he had relied upon, the flippant jokes he had used to mask fear. All of it had led him here, not as the man who had stumbled through a collapsing station, but as someone who could face the incomprehensible and survive. Leora floated close, her eyes shimmering in the soft light of the docking bay, her long ears brushing the ceiling as if to test gravity's return. "We did it," Jonah said quietly. "We're alive. And somehow, the universe is still mildly terrifying, but I feel like I might just get used to it." Leora nodded, placing a hand lightly on the console. "You've survived where most would not. That counts for more than any battle or rank, and you've done it with laughter." Jonah's eyes drifted to the stars outside one final time, noting the small constellations of distant suns, the drifting asteroid belts, and the faint shimmer of the threshold far beyond. Unseen but never forgotten. "I suppose this is the part where I reflect and grow philosophical," he said, smirking. "Except I'll also want coffee." Leora laughed, and for a moment the universe seemed smaller, more intimate, and even a little less intimidating. Jonah realized he had grown not by conquering space or evading death, but by learning that courage could exist in humor, and that compassion, even toward the unknown, could shape destiny. Together, they stepped into the settlement, leaving behind the chaos of the station, the shadow of the threshold, and a trail of stories that would carry through the stars. Jonah had once been ordinary. Now he was a man who had faced incomprehensible forces, protected a life, and emerged irrevocably changed, carrying with him the knowledge that even in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, a single choice and a good laugh could make all the difference.